The city was quiet that Christmas Eve, but the cold seemed sharper than usual. Snow fell gently from the sky, covering the streets with a soft white blanket. Most people were inside their warm homes, celebrating with lights, laughter, and the smell of holiday food. But not everyone had a home to go to, and not everyone could enjoy the comfort that the holiday promised. Among the shadows of the tall buildings, a young girl named Lila walked slowly, her thin coat doing little to keep the cold out. Her boots were worn and her fingers were red and stiff from the icy wind. Lila had been living on the streets for a while now. Her mother had fallen sick months ago, and their small apartment had been taken away when they could no longer pay rent. At first they had stayed at a shelter, but it was crowded, noisy, and uncomfortable. Nights were hard and the winter made everything worse. Lila had learned to walk quietly to avoid trouble and to hide from people who might not see her as a person. She had learned to survive with very little, carrying her few belongings in a worn backpack. That night she wandered near the town square, where the city had put up its Christmas decorations. Strings of lights glimmered on the trees and shop windows were filled with colorful displays. She paused for a moment, looking at the glittering decorations and the happy faces passing by. A warm feeling flickered in her chest, a mix of longing and hope. She wished she could be inside, with a warm blanket and a hot meal, but she knew wishing didn't change anything. As she walked further, she noticed an elderly man sitting on a bench near the fountain. He looked small and fragile in the cold, his hands trembling as he clutched an old coat around his shoulders. His face was pale and he seemed lost in thought, staring at nothing in particular. Something about him made Lila stop. Most people would have walked past without noticing him, wrapped in their own holiday plans, but she felt a pull in her heart. She hesitated for a moment, thinking about her own hunger and the thin blanket she carried. She had learned to save it for herself, to keep a little warmth during the nights. But looking at the man, she felt a stronger need to help. Lila approached him slowly, her boots crunching on the snow. The man looked up as she neared, his eyes wide with surprise. "Are you okay?" Lila asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. She held out the blanket she had been carrying. "You look very cold. Here, take this. It will help a little." The man looked at her and a faint smile appeared on his lips. "Thank you," he said, his voice weak but kind. "I haven't eaten today, and I didn't think anyone would notice me." Lila's stomach growled as she remembered the small sandwich she had saved from the shelter earlier that day. It wasn't much, just a thin piece of bread with a bit of cheese, but she knew she could share it. She carefully unwrapped it and handed half to him. "Here, it's not much, but maybe it will help," she said. The man accepted it, his hands shaking as he took the food. He chewed slowly, savoring every bite, and then looked at her with gratitude. "You are very kind, young lady. I don't know your name, but thank you." "I'm Lila," she replied. "I'm staying at the shelter nearby. Merry Christmas." She tried to smile, but the cold had made her lips stiff. "Merry Christmas, Lila," the man said. He paused, then added softly, "You remind me of my daughter. She would have been about your age." His voice was tinged with sadness, and Lila felt a pang of sympathy. They sat in silence for a few minutes, sharing the small warmth of the blanket and the simple meal. Lila watched the snow fall, thinking about her mother, who had promised to visit a friend for medicine that evening. She hoped her mother was safe, but she pushed the thought aside for the moment. The elderly man needed her now and she wanted to help. After a while, the man stood up slowly. He seemed stronger now that he had eaten a little, but he was still fragile. "You have a good heart, Lila," he said, adjusting his coat. "Not many people would stop to help a stranger on a night like this." Lila shrugged, feeling a little shy. I just wanted to help." "You looked cold and alone. I couldn't just walk by." The man nodded, his eyes soft. "You did the right thing. I will not forget this." He smiled faintly, then walked a few steps before turning back to her. "Be careful out there and keep your heart safe. The world can be harsh even at Christmas." Lila watched him walk away, feeling a strange warmth in her chest despite the cold. She continued down the street, thinking about what had just happened. She had given something to someone else, and it had not left her empty. If anything, she felt stronger, braver, and somehow lighter. As she walked, she noticed other people rushing past, carrying bags of gifts, smiling and laughing with friends and family. Some glanced at her and looked away quickly, pretending not to notice. Lila had grown used to that, the feeling of being invisible. But that night, after helping the man, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, at least by him, and that feeling stayed with her as she wandered the city streets. She passed a bakery with warm light spilling out onto the sidewalk. The smell of fresh bread and pastries made her stomach growl again, but she didn't stop. There was nowhere for her to go, and she had learned to keep moving to avoid trouble to survive. Yet deep down she longed for more than survival. She wanted a home, a warm bed, and her mother beside her. She wanted to belong somewhere. Lila walked until she reached a small park near the shelter. The benches were covered in snow and the trees were bare, their branches scratching the sky. She sat down for a moment, wrapping herself in the thin blanket she had brought. Her hands were still cold and her stomach still ached, but she felt a little less alone. The world was big and sometimes it was cruel. But small acts of kindness could make it better, even if just a little. As she sat there, she thought about the man she had helped. She wondered if he would be okay, if someone would notice him and help him further. She hoped so. In her short life, she had seen how one kind act could ripple into something bigger. Sometimes even a small gesture could change someone's entire day, or even their life. The snow began to fall harder, and the wind picked up, cutting through her thin coat. Lila knew it was time to move. The shelter was not far, and she needed to get some rest before morning. She stood brushing the snow from her coat and took a deep breath of the cold air. She had done something good tonight, something that made her heart feel full even in the emptiness of the streets. She began walking back toward the shelter, her boots crunching in the fresh snow. She passed people hurrying home, their voices muffled by scarves in the wind. She passed a row of closed shops, their windows reflecting the twinkling lights above. Lila kept moving, her mind replaying the brief connection she had shared with the elderly man. It was a reminder that even in the coldest, loneliest times, humans could touch each other in ways that mattered. By the time she reached the shelter, her fingers were numb and her face was red from the wind. She went inside and was greeted by the warmth and chatter of other people seeking refuge from the cold. She found her bed, a small cot with thin sheets, and lay down, pulling the blanket around herself. She closed her eyes, thinking about the day, about the man on the bench, and about the snow falling quietly outside. Even though she was still cold, hungry, and far from home, Lila felt a spark of hope. She had done something meaningful that night. She had made a difference, even if it was small, and that thought carried her into sleep, giving her the first peaceful rest she had had in weeks. Little did she know, the night's small act of kindness was only the beginning. It was a thread that would soon weave into a larger story, one that would change her life and lead her to challenges and discoveries she could not yet imagine. But for now, she rested, holding on to the warmth that came not from food or shelter, but from the simple truth that even someone like her could touch another human being's life with a single gesture. The city outside was quiet, and the snow continued to fall. Christmas Eve carried its magic in small, unseen ways, and Lila had been part of it. She had helped someone in need, and in doing so, she had given herself a gift greater than anything under the brightest Christmas tree, the knowledge that kindness mattered, and that she had the power to make a difference no matter how small. The morning light seeped through the thin curtains of the shelter, soft and pale against the harshness of the winter outside. Lila woke with a start, the warmth of the blanket around her contrasting sharply with the chill that still lingered in her bones. She blinked, trying to shake off the remnants of sleep, and instantly her heart skipped a beat. Her mother's bed, which was usually beside hers, was empty. At first, she thought maybe her mother had gone to the bathroom or stepped out for a walk, but as minutes stretched into an hour, worry began to creep in like an unwelcome shadow. Lila's stomach twisted, and she felt a tightness in her chest she hadn't experienced in a long time. She got up quickly, pulling her coat around herself and grabbing the small backpack she always carried. Her mother had promised to return the night before after visiting a friend for medicine. Now she was gone, and Lila had no idea where to start looking. The shelter was bustling with people. Some were eating breakfast, others talking quietly, and a few were already preparing to leave for the day. Lila moved quickly between them, asking if anyone had seen her mother, describing her carefully, hoping someone would recognize her. But the faces remained blank or shook their heads. The panic inside her grew with every passing minute. She decided she had to search outside. She stepped out into the winter air, the cold biting through her thin coat, making her cheeks red and her nose tingle. The streets were beginning to wake up. Delivery trucks rumbled down the road, and a few early shoppers hurried past with bags in their hands. Lila's small boots made quiet crunching sounds in the snow as she walked, scanning every face she passed, hoping against hope that she would spot her mother. Her mind raced with questions. Had something happened to her? Did she get lost? Or worse, had someone taken her? Lila's steps quickened as fear pressed down on her, each breath forming clouds in the icy air. She retraced the path her mother usually took, stopping at the small grocery store, the park, and the pharmacy she often visited. Each time the answer was the same. No one had seen her. As she turned a corner near the town square, something caught her eye. Sitting on a bench near the fountain was the elderly man she had helped the night before. He was wrapped in a thicker coat now, and a small bag sat beside him. He looked up and smiled faintly when he saw her, but there was a seriousness in his eyes that made Lila pause. "Lila," he called softly as she approached. "I've been looking for you. Are you all right?" She shook her head quickly, tears welling in her eyes. "It's my mother," she whispered. She's missing. I don't know where she is. I looked everywhere and no one has seen her." The man's face softened and he gestured for her to sit beside him on the bench. "Take a moment," he said gently. "Tell me everything from the beginning." Lila sat down, hugging her knees to keep warm. She explained how her mother had gone out last night to see a friend and never returned. How she had hoped she would be back in the morning. How she had searched the streets, the stores, and the park, but there was no sign of her. The elderly man listened quietly, nodding occasionally, his eyes full of concern. When she finished, he reached into his bag and pulled out a small thermos of hot chocolate. "Here," he said, handing it to her. "Drink this. You need your strength." Lila took the cup with trembling hands, sipping carefully. The warmth spread through her chest, calming her slightly. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't even know your name." "Harold," he replied. "My name is Harold, and I think we can help each other today." Lila looked at him, confusion mixed with hope. "Help each other? How?" Harold explained that after she had helped him the night before, he had been thinking about how rare it was to meet someone with such a kind heart. He had wanted to repay her in some way. That morning, he had spoken to a young couple who had seen him in the square and had taken him to a nearby hotel for warmth and food. He said they had been kind to him, just as she had been the night before. But when he saw her upset, he knew that helping her find her mother was more important than anything else. "I know some people," Harold said, "friends, acquaintances, and even a few volunteers around the city. We can ask them if they've seen your mother. We'll start with the shelters and clinics, places where someone might go if they need help." Lila nodded, her heart feeling slightly lighter. She was still scared, but Harold's calm presence gave her hope. Together they began walking through the city, moving quickly but carefully. Harold asked questions as they went, describing Lila's mother to anyone they met. At each place, Lila's anxiety built as she waited for an answer. Some said no, shaking their heads, but one or two offered small pieces of information. She had been seen distributing blankets at a local soup kitchen, for example, but had left suddenly with someone in a dark coat. The more Lila heard, the more worried she became. Who had she gone with? Was she in danger? Harold noticed the tension in her shoulders and kept speaking softly, telling her to focus on each step, to take one moment at a time. Hours passed as they went from shelter to shelter, clinic to clinic, and finally to a small cafe where volunteers often gathered. Lila was exhausted, her stomach growling, but she refused to stop. She knew that if she paused for too long, she might lose precious time. As they stepped inside, a familiar volunteer recognized Lila from the shelter. "You're looking for your mother?" the volunteer asked immediately. "I think I saw her last night. She was helping hand out blankets downtown near the park. She left suddenly with a man in a dark coat, though. I don't know where they went." Lila's heart jumped. "Do you remember what he looked like?" The volunteer shook her head. "No, I'm sorry. It was too dark to see clearly. But if she left with him, maybe she went to one of the clinics nearby. There are a few that stay open overnight for emergencies." Harold nodded thoughtfully. "Then that's our next step," he said. "We will check every clinic we can reach." Together they walked briskly, making calls to a few places along the way. One friend of Harold's worked at a small clinic on the edge of the city. After a tense few minutes, the nurse on the phone confirmed that a woman matching Lila's mother's description had been brought in earlier that morning. Lila's heart raced as Harold gave her the directions. When they arrived, Lila ran toward the entrance, Harold keeping a steady pace behind her. The receptionist nodded and led them to a small room in the back. And there she was, her mother lying on a simple cot, looking pale and weak but awake. "Mom!" Lila cried, rushing forward and throwing her arms around her. Her mother held her tightly, whispering apologies over and over. Lila could feel the exhaustion and fear in her mother's body, but she also felt relief, like a heavy weight had been lifted from her chest. The doctor explained that her mother had fainted from exhaustion while collecting donations for the shelter. She had been dehydrated, hungry, and weak from trying to do good for others while not taking care of herself. Lila felt tears streaming down her face as she listened, holding her mother's hand tightly. Harold stood quietly at the door, watching the reunion with a gentle smile. Lila looked up at him, grateful beyond words. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what we would have done without you." Harold shook his head, his eyes kind. "No thanks needed," he said softly. "Sometimes life gives us small opportunities to help others. You did that for me last night. Now I'm just returning the favor." They stayed for a while, making sure her mother had everything she needed. Lila helped her settle, getting blankets and water and listening to her speak in soft, tired words. The fear of the morning began to fade, replaced by relief and a renewed sense of hope. Before leaving, Harold handed Lila a small card with his name and address written on it. "If you ever need anything," he said, "or just want to talk, you can come here. You've got a good heart, Lila, and the world needs more people like you." Lila clutched the card in her hand, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the winter cold. She promised she would visit once her mother had recovered, not realizing that this simple gesture of trust would soon lead to changes she could never have imagined. As they walked back to the shelter together, Lila felt a mix of emotions, relief, gratitude, and hope. The city no longer felt quite so cold and empty. She had found her mother, and she had met someone who saw her for who she was, someone who believed in the power of kindness. Even as snow continued to fall around them, Lila felt a quiet happiness growing inside her. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, but she also knew that small acts of courage and care could make all the difference. That Christmas morning had begun in fear and uncertainty, but it ended with warmth, love, and a reminder that even in the hardest times, people could help each other in ways that mattered more than anything. The day after finding her mother felt strange to Lila, as if the city had shifted slightly while she slept. The snow had stopped, leaving streets glistening in the early morning sun. The chill was still there, but the air felt lighter somehow, less heavy with fear. Her mother, though still weak, was recovering in the small clinic room. Lila stayed close, helping her drink water and eat a little breakfast the nurse had prepared. Each small smile from her mother felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. By mid-morning, her mother insisted she could get up and try walking. Lila offered her arm, supporting her carefully as they made their way down the quiet streets. They didn't speak much at first, both of them overwhelmed by the events of the past day. The snow crunched under their feet, and Lila felt a strange mix of relief and lingering anxiety. She knew this was only the beginning of what they had to face. Being homeless wasn't something that vanished overnight. They had shelter temporarily, but they still had no home, no steady income, and no certainty for the days ahead. Harold had left the card with Lila the day before, and she couldn't stop thinking about him. The way he had quietly supported her, how he had noticed her when no one else had, made her feel seen in a world that often ignored her. She wanted to tell her mother more about him, but first, she needed to make sure her mother was strong enough to walk outside without help. As they passed the town square, Lila spotted Harold sitting on a bench reading a small book. He looked up as they approached and gave a small nod. Lila waved, and her mother smiled weakly, shyly acknowledging him. Harold stood and came toward them, his steps careful on the icy sidewalks. "Good morning," he said gently. "How is she doing?" "She's better," Lila replied. "Much better, thanks to you." Harold shook his head. "No thanks. You did your part. You acted with a kind heart, and it's only right that we keep helping each other when we can." His eyes softened as he looked at Lila. "How are you feeling?" Lila hesitated, unsure how to put her emotions into words. Relief, fear, exhaustion, hope, they all battled inside her at once. "I'm okay," she finally said. "Just tired." Harold nodded knowingly. "We've been through a lot. Sometimes even small steps forward feel bigger than they really are. But today we can take some more steps together." Curiosity and trust filled Lila as they walked together, her mother supported beside her. Harold suggested they visit a few more places to make sure no further help was needed. He had contacts at shelters, clinics, and even small community centers. Lila marveled at how he seemed to know everyone, and how his calm presence made the day feel less chaotic. Their first stop was a small shelter that often provided food and temporary beds to families in need. The volunteer recognized Lila and her mother immediately. "I'm so glad she's okay," the woman said. "We were worried when she disappeared last night." "You did the right thing bringing her here." Lila's mother smiled weakly, thanking the volunteer. She explained how she had been trying to help others while struggling herself, how she had fainted and ended up in the clinic. The volunteer nodded understandingly. She offered a small package of food for the day and suggested a place where they could stay safely until they could figure out their next steps. Harold thanked her, and Lila felt a quiet sense of relief knowing there were people who cared. After leaving the shelter, Harold suggested they walk toward the small park near the city center. "Sometimes people wander, and it's better to check everywhere they might go naturally," he explained. As they walked, he spoke softly about his own life, sharing small pieces of his story. He had once owned a small bookstore in the city. After his wife passed away, he had lost everything and learned how quickly life could change. Hearing Harold's story made Lila think about her own situation. She had always felt invisible, like her life didn't matter in the bigger world. But listening to Harold reminded her that life could turn unexpectedly, and small acts of kindness could ripple into something much larger than anyone could imagine. His words carried hope, even amidst the challenges they still faced. At the park, they paused to rest on a bench. Harold pulled out a small map of the city from his bag. "There are a few clinics and community centers I want us to check today," he said. "It's unlikely anything bad has happened, but it's better to be safe." Lila's mother, though still weak, insisted on walking with them. She held onto Lila's arm, steadying herself, while Harold walked a little ahead, pointing out places they could check. The air was cold, but it no longer felt oppressive. Lila noticed the small things. The children playing quietly in the distance, the sound of distant bells from the church, the warmth of the sun reflecting off the snow. For the first time in weeks, she felt a little of the world's beauty, even in the midst of fear. Their first stop was a community center that provided clothing and food to those in need. Inside, volunteers were busy organizing donations, speaking softly to people who had come for help. Lila approached the front desk and Harold introduced her and her mother. "We're checking to see if anyone has seen her," Harold explained. The woman behind the desk nodded and disappeared into a back room. Moments later, she returned, shaking her head. "No, I'm sorry. We haven't seen her." Lila's shoulders sagged slightly, but Harold encouraged her not to lose hope. "Sometimes the right person will show up where you least expect it," he said. "Let's keep moving. There are still a few more places we can check." They visited a small clinic on the edge of town next. The nurse remembered seeing someone who matched her mother's description the previous evening, but hadn't spoken to her. She confirmed that her mother had been helped, but had left quickly, leaving no information about where she was going. Lila's heart pounded. That meant there was still uncertainty. Harold held her hand gently, giving silent encouragement. "Let's check one more place," Harold said. "A volunteer friend of mine works at a soup kitchen downtown. They sometimes have people staying overnight or finding food during emergencies. We might get lucky there." By the time they reached the soup kitchen, afternoon had arrived. The streets were busier now, filled with people going about their daily routines. Lila felt the weight of exhaustion, but she pushed it aside. She had to find answers to make sure her mother was safe. Inside the soup kitchen, the aroma of hot meals was comforting. Volunteers were serving food to a long line of people, and Harold greeted a few of them warmly. One volunteer, a woman with kind eyes, paused and looked at Lila and her mother. "Wait, I think I saw her last night," she said slowly. She was helping hand out blankets in the square, but then she left with someone in a dark coat. "I didn't see where they went." Lila's heart skipped a beat. She repeated the description to Harold, and he nodded, deep in thought. "Then we know where she was last seen. Now we need to find out where she went after that. It's likely someone brought her to a safe place. She couldn't have gone far alone." They left the soup kitchen and began retracing the path her mother had taken. Harold made a few phone calls as they walked, checking with friends who worked in clinics and shelters nearby. After several attempts, one friend confirmed that a woman matching her mother's description had been brought into a small clinic not far from the city center after fainting from exhaustion. Lila's heart raced. This was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. They arrived at the clinic within minutes. Lila's mother leaned on her daughter, her energy nearly gone, but there was a spark of hope in her eyes. When the nurse recognized them, she nodded and guided them to the room where her mother had been resting. Relief washed over Lila as she saw her mother lying safely on the cot, pale but conscious. Tears streamed down Lila's face as she held her mother's hand. Her mother whispered apologies, and Lila reassured her, telling her it wasn't her fault and that she was safe now. Harold stood quietly at the door, watching the reunion with a small, proud smile. "You see," Harold said gently, "sometimes life brings us small opportunities to help each other. Last night you helped me, and today I helped you. The world can be harsh, but kindness always finds its way back." Lila looked at him, feeling a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the cold winter day. She knew he was right. Small acts of care, small steps of courage, could change the course of someone's life. As they left the clinic together, Harold handed Lila a small card with his address. "If you ever need anything or if you just want to talk, you can come here," he said softly. "You have a good heart, Lila. Don't forget that." Clutching the card, Lila felt hope growing inside her. The world wasn't completely cruel. There were people like Harold who saw others, who cared, and who acted. And now, for the first time in a long while, she believed that maybe, just maybe, things could get better for her and her mother. That afternoon, as they walked back toward the shelter, Lila noticed the small signs of life in the city. The laughter of children, the sound of bells from the church, the smell of bread baking in nearby bakeries. For the first time in weeks, the city didn't feel cold and empty. It felt full of possibilities, small but real, waiting for her to take the next step. The day had grown colder again, and a soft wind swept through the streets, carrying the faint smell of wood smoke from nearby chimneys. Lila held her mother's hand tightly as they left the clinic, moving carefully along the icy sidewalks. Her mother's steps were slow, and Lila had to steady her, guiding her through the bustling city. Though she was still weak, her mother's face was lighter than it had been the previous day. There was a sense of cautious hope between them, fragile but real. Harold walked beside them, his coat buttoned tightly against the chill. He suggested a quiet route through side streets rather than the main roads, both to avoid crowds and to give Lila and her mother some peace after the stressful hours. Lila listened closely to his advice, grateful for his presence. He had been quiet yet steady, offering support without overwhelming her. For someone who had been surviving alone for so long, having Harold there felt like an unexpected gift. They arrived at a small cafe tucked away in a corner, one that Harold said was run by friends who were always willing to help those in need. He led them inside, and the warmth immediately enveloped them. The rich smell of coffee and baked goods filled the air, and Lila could feel some of the tension leaving her shoulders. They found a corner table, and Harold ordered a light meal for her mother and herself, while Lila sipped on a warm cup of cocoa. As they settled, Harold began speaking softly, sharing more about his own life. He told them about the small bookstore he had once owned, a place filled with stories, laughter, and the comfort of community. After his wife had passed away, the store had been sold, and his life had fallen into quiet loneliness. Meeting Lila the night before had reminded him of the importance of human connection, and he had made it his mission to help her in any way he could. Lila listened, fascinated. For so long she had felt invisible, like the world moved around her without noticing. But Harold's story reminded her that even when life seemed harsh and unfair, small gestures could make a difference. She felt a new sense of determination. She had helped someone yesterday, and now someone was helping her. That exchange, simple as it was, gave her hope. Once they finished their light meal, Harold suggested visiting a few more places to ensure Lila's mother had everything she needed. He explained that sometimes people who helped others in need, like her mother, could unintentionally put themselves in danger if they overexerted themselves. It was important to make sure she had a safe space to rest and recover. Their first stop was a local shelter that often provided longer-term assistance. The volunteer there welcomed them warmly, recognizing Lila from previous visits. "I'm so glad your mother is okay," she said. "We were worried when we heard she hadn't returned last night." She explained that there were a few openings in their temporary housing program, and Lila's mother could stay safely while they figured out their next steps. Lila's heart lifted at the thought of her mother having a warm bed for the first time in weeks. After ensuring her mother's place at the shelter was secure, Harold suggested checking in with a community clinic that occasionally offered medical support and counseling. Even small support can make a difference, he said. You never know who might be able to help further. At the clinic, a nurse recognized Lila's mother and confirmed that her condition had been stable. She also mentioned that some volunteers at the center could provide additional resources for families who had experienced homelessness. While they were at the clinic, Harold made a phone call to one of his longtime friends, a man who had worked in social services for years. The man agreed to meet them later in the afternoon to discuss options for support, shelter, and even potential work opportunities for Lila's mother once she regained her strength. Lila listened, amazed at how many people Harold seemed to know and how many connections he had. It was a world she had never realized existed, one where people looked out for each other. After leaving the clinic, they walked toward a nearby park to catch their breath. The snow had started to fall lightly again, dusting the bare branches of trees with a soft layer of white. Lila's mother leaned heavily on her arm, and Harold guided them gently through the park, pointing out benches where they could rest. Lila felt a mixture of relief and awe, relief that her mother was safe, and awe at the kindness that had entered their lives through Harold's quiet presence. As they rested, Harold spoke again, reminding Lila of the importance of keeping hope alive. Life is often unpredictable, he said. It can throw challenges at you when you least expect it. But sometimes those challenges lead to something unexpected, something good. Meeting you reminded me of that. Lila nodded, understanding in a way she hadn't before. She had experienced hardship, fear and uncertainty, yet here she was, sitting in a warm park with people who genuinely cared. They continued their journey through the city, checking in with a few more small centers and community hubs. At each stop, Lila's mother received guidance and support, whether it was a promise of a safe meal, a warm bed, or just words of encouragement. Every small gesture lifted Lila's spirits, and she began to believe that life could hold more than the struggles she had endured. By late afternoon, they reached a small clinic that Harold had called earlier. The nurse greeted them warmly and led them to a quiet room. "We've been expecting you," she said. "There are resources here that can help your mother recover fully. We can also help with planning for her safety and well-being going forward." Lila felt a wave of relief wash over her. Finally, they were in a place where her mother could heal, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally as well. Harold smiled at Lila. "You see, sometimes help comes from unexpected places," he said. "You helped me yesterday, and now you're receiving help. Life works in strange ways, but kindness always comes back to those who give it." Lila nodded, clutching her mother's hand tightly. She understood in a way she hadn't before. The world could be cruel, yes, but it could also be filled with people who cared deeply, people willing to step in when others were struggling. That knowledge gave her strength she hadn't known she had. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting the city in a soft, golden glow, Harold suggested one final stop. He wanted to take Lila and her mother to a small community center that hosted evening gatherings for families and individuals in need. It was a place where people could meet, share meals, and find companionship. He believed it would be good for them to be around others, to feel the support of a larger community. The center was warm and welcoming. Families were gathered around tables, volunteers moved quietly offering food and drink, and a small fire crackled in the corner, giving the room a comforting glow. Lila and her mother were greeted warmly, and soon they were sitting together with a bowl of soup and some bread. For the first time in weeks, they felt a sense of belonging. The fear and uncertainty that had haunted them for so long began to ease, replaced by the gentle comfort of being cared for and seen. Harold stood at the edge of the room, watching them with a small smile. Lila caught his eye and nodded, silently expressing her gratitude. He nodded back, understanding the unspoken words. Sometimes no words were needed. Action spoke louder. As the evening drew on, Lila's mother rested, her strength slowly returning. Lila stayed close, her heart full of quiet hope. She realized that the events of the past 2 days had changed something inside her. She had witnessed the power of kindness, the way small actions could ripple outward and create real, tangible change. She had been helped when she was at her lowest, and she had helped someone else without expecting anything in return. That balance, that cycle of giving and receiving, felt like the beginning of something new. Before leaving, Harold handed Lila a small envelope. Inside was a note with his address and a few details about the community center and the resources they could access. "This is for you," he said softly. "Keep it safe. If you ever need anything or if you want to talk, you can come here. You're stronger than you think, Lila. And you're not alone." Clutching the envelope, Lila felt a surge of warmth and determination. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and loss, yet she had also experienced the unexpected kindness of strangers. She knew that the road ahead would still be difficult, but she now believed that she could face it with courage and hope. As they walked back to the temporary shelter, the city around them began to quiet. The snow continued to fall softly, covering the streets in a blanket of white. Lila held her mother's hand tightly, feeling a sense of connection and resilience she hadn't known she possessed. The day had been long, exhausting, and full of challenges, but it had also been filled with care, support, and the quiet magic of human kindness. That night, as they settled into the shelter for the evening, Lila felt a small but significant shift inside her. The fear and uncertainty that had dominated her life seemed a little less powerful. She had found help, guidance, and hope in unexpected places, and she knew that her journey was just beginning. With her mother safe and Harold's support nearby, she felt ready to face whatever came next. Even as the city slept under a quiet layer of snow, Lila understood something important. The world was full of people willing to help, and she had the power to make a difference in ways she could never have imagined. The small acts of kindness she had given and received were not just temporary, Essie.